Hi, and welcome to The Pretty Intellectual. I'm Sarah Bartlett, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. On this channel, we talk about all the things that matter to women over 40. And today, what matters is our reading life, books. Honestly, books matter all of the time, but in honor of Women's History Month, which is March, I thought I would go to my bookshelves and pull a selection of titles written by female authors and that I love, that I go back to over and over again, and just share them with you. I'm hoping that you might discover a new author or a new story that you want to add to your TBR. And I noticed that there is a connecting thread, and this obviously says a lot about my personal reading life. But for as diverse as each of these stories are, they all have a connecting thread, and that is community, connection, and the friendships that build us. So with that, let's get into the first book. The first book that I want to share with you is Love and Saffron by Kim Fay. I love this novel. I recommend it to pretty much anyone who asks me for a book recommendation. Kim Fay is an American author whose writing is often influenced by her life as a travel writer. That really comes through, I think, in her text. And a lot of her stories feature themes around friendship and the culinary arts, which I really enjoy cooking. And I really enjoy seeing characters get to know one another in deep and interesting ways. And that's definitely the case with this one. This is an epistolary novel, which means that it is told through the exchange of letters. Set in the 1960s, Love and Saffron tells the story of Joan Bergstrom, who is a young food writer in Los Angeles, and Imogen Fortier, who is a seasoned columnist who writes from her home in the Pacific Northwest. Their friendship develops when Joan sends Imogen a letter, a fan letter essentially, letting her know how much she admires her work, and also sharing a strand of saffron, which at the time was a very, exotic ingredient, one that wasn't easily found in grocery stores and used in a lot of American recipes and cooking in the US at that time. As the story develops, the two women exchange recipes and then cultural details of their lives and their own personal stories. And the 60s is a pretty interesting time for this novel to be set, because honestly, it's not an era that I've read a lot about anyway. Obviously, there are plenty of books written and set in the 1960s, but I personally have not seen one recently. And so I really enjoyed going into that era with them. It's obviously an era of a lot of time changing, a lot of things changing during that time. And Joan and Imogen really provide an interesting glimpse into what those changes look like for a younger woman who is just starting off in her life and an older woman who is situated and settled. She has a career, she has, a home and a husband and a life, and they're in very different places, obviously, geographically, socioeconomically, and it's just interesting to see how they forge that connection and how it really becomes a bridge to these two women. Their letters are they're absolutely wonderful. You really get to see their relationship develop. They both go through personal challenges and changes. And as is to be expected, especially when your primary way of communicating is letters, it's revealed to the reader that each of them has something going on in their lives that the other one doesn't necessarily know about. But I really love that this particular book shows how strong connection can be, especially when you take the chance to just reach out to someone. How many times have I seen someone that I've thought, oh, I would really like to get to know them better. And then for whatever reason, I make absolutely no effort to do that. I really admired the way that this story developed from just that one seed of kindness, of writing a fan letter to Imogen and saying, hey, I like what you do. And in offering, here's something that I like that I think you might enjoy as well. So I thought that was really beautiful. And this novel is a warm hug. It's also pretty short. It's under 180 pages. So it's one that you can get on the couch and pull a nice cozy blanket over you and read in one sitting if you have the time and if you are that kind of person, which I definitely am. So that is Love and Saffron by Kim Fay. and I love this one. The next book that I have is Foster by Claire Keegan. Claire Keegan is an Irish author who is really well known in the space for her short stories. This woman has the ability to say more in fewer words than anybody I've ever read before. I mean, she's able to evoke emotion and understanding in just the most precise, concise storytelling that I personally have ever read before. You might have seen a movie on, I think it's Amazon Prime, starring Cillian Murphy called Small Things Like These. If you have seen that and you watched it, it's based on one of her other novels, Small Things Like These. But the reason I love Foster is because it is such a quiet, and that's cliche to say that about Keegan, but it's such a quiet story that also feels universal. Foster follows the story of a young girl who is sent away from her parents' home to live with some distant relatives. Her parents are strapped financially. They don't have resources of time, attention to give to her as they're preparing to welcome another child into their home. And so they send this young girl off to live with some relatives temporarily. And we get to go through the experience with her of sort of that uncertainty of what, going to stay with people that I don't know, and who are they and what are they like? And gradually we get to see her experience what it's like to have people who care for not just your basic needs, but who give you genuine love, affection. It's something that she is really not used to. And that's incredibly sad and uncomfortable in and of itself as you're reading it through her point of view. But it's pretty amazing to watch her come to understand what it's like to have people who will care for her just because she exists, because she is worthy of love and care. The couple has some things going on in their lives that she slowly becomes aware of. And of course, at some point, she has to go home. This was never meant to be a permanent living situation. And so we get to experience with her what that feels like, to carry the loving experience that she learned in that home with her. This is not something to read if you are already feeling a little down, or if you are feeling, like maybe a little displaced yourself in the world. You need to be in the right headspace for this one, but I absolutely recommend it. At 92 pages, I think it's 92. Yeah, it's 92 pages. It's another really quick read, but this one will stick with you. It catches in your heart and, just kind of hooks a little thorn right in your heart. And I love it. So this is definitely a very different reading experience from the warm and cozy Love and Saffron. But man, Foster is so good. So I definitely recommend this to anyone who is looking for something that is emotional and a little wistful, a little bittersweet, but also that will speak to you, I think, in a way that resonates specifically to you. You will find in it what it is that you need to find. That was my experience with the book, and I love that about books. Great books can really do that, can't they? Let's take a left turn. The next book that I have to share with you is This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. This is a contemporary romance, and I grew up reading romance, and so this is a genre that I come back to over and over again. It's definitely a comfortable, sweet spot for me. And honestly, Kennedy Ryan is doing it better than anyone I've read in a really long time. She has a fantastic way of really dialing into the true complexities of her heroine. You see the good, the bad, the mundane. You see the characters living their lives just like all of us do. And then also experiencing highs, lows. Man, you have something to root for in her books. They're just great. And she writes with humor, and she writes with a style that I think is very much her own. And I just really enjoy Kennedy's writing. She also made history as the first Black writer to win the Rita Award, which is from the Romance Writers Association, for Best Novel in 2019 for her book Long Shot. which I have not read, but it's definitely on my list. So This Could Be Us is a really fun book. So we are in it with Soledad Barnes, who is a woman whose identity is wrapped firmly and tightly around being a mother and a wife and doing all of it perfectly. But of course, nothing is perfect underneath the surface of anyone's life. It's completely blown up when her absolute toad of a husband cheats on her and leaves her. And she is left, with a house that is suddenly just a complete facade. And she's left to raise her daughters on her own. She relied on him financially. I mean, that's a huge component of why a lot of women or partners don't leave shitty spouses. And so we get to see her go through that. So she's not only like having to build up her own self-esteem and her own self-worth, but also become financially independent and continue raising these daughters. Of course, there is a romance aspect to this, which is very satisfying. It is pretty sexy, and it is made up of two adults, which I really appreciate in a romance novel at my age. When I was younger, I definitely was into like the miscommunication trope, or, something more juvenile, something juvenile like that. In this book, the main characters are communicating. They're upfront. They know what each of them wants. And it's not that they are not communicating about that necessarily. It's that, the circumstances, it's like wrong time, right person, wrong time. And there is a pretty interesting, fun side story, not really side story, but element of, she really needs to find something that is her own and stick it to her husband. And I mean, the hallmark of a romance novel is a happy ending. And so, she's going to do it. So I really enjoyed this. And so if you enjoy romance writing as well, or even just maybe romance isn't exactly what you're looking for, but this is just a really strong book about women, their support systems, their networks, and figuring out what the hell you want to do with yourself at any point in your life. And seriously, who cannot relate to that? I know I can. Where are my fantasy readers? I am not typically a fantasy reader, but I have recently gotten into an author named T. Kingfisher, which is the pen name for an American writer named Ursula Vernon. Dan has read quite a bit of T. Kingfisher, and so he got me into her novels. And the one that I want to share with you is called Thornhedge. What I really enjoy about the way that Kingfisher writes is that she blends a lot of themes around folklore, fairy tales, there's always like a kind of a moody gothic feel to her writing, but she blends it all with humor and personality. I mean, she has this very distinct writing voice that is just, anytime I open a book, I can immediately tell that there we are, there she is. There's, T. Kingfisher. And so I really enjoyed this one. I grew up a huge fan of fairy tales, and this is essentially a retelling, a spin on Sleeping Beauty. So the premise of it is, what if Sleeping Beauty was put in a castle, not for her own safety necessarily, but for the safety of everyone else around her? What if she's an absolute terror? I love that because it is a different way of looking at what's been right in front of us for, generations. Sleeping Beauty is such a classic, and I have always just taken it at face value. And that is definitely something about me and my personality, is that I oftentimes do take what's in front of me at face value. And I really appreciated the fun, engaging way that this novel nudges a reader to rethink and really take a deeper look. So we are following Toadling, because this is not Sleeping Beauty's story. This is the story of the fantastical guardian who is sent to oversee Sleeping Beauty and make sure that that girl does not wake up anytime soon. And so Toadling is a creature. She that she can transform into a person, a woman, and also into a toad. So this is where some of my my lack of knowledge around describing fantasy is really going to show up. So, but I will persevere, and you will come with me. So, Toadling. She is someone who has never quite felt like she belongs. She yearns for family. She yearns for connection. And she has had to sacrifice that in order to keep her post and do her duty in overseeing Sleeping Beauty. So much of her life is about keeping others away, keeping others out of the castle. And when a prince unexpectedly shows up in order to check out this Sleeping Beauty that he's heard about and is interested in, she is immediately conflicted. She's drawn to this person because, unlike many of the Prince Charmings that we've been told about in other fairy tales, this guy is a little more average. He's just a lot more like, a guy that you maybe went to high school with and was a little dorky, but was definitely the smart, fun one, who happens to be a prince. So she's drawn to him and wants to spend time with him, but also knows that it's her duty to keep him out of the castle. So at the end of the day, it's another story about someone who is at a crossroads and who has to decide if they're going to accept the invitation to live life differently, or if they are going to step away and push that away. And like, seriously, relatable. I love the way that Kingfisher writes. I love her point of view. And I always, this is a book, it's again, another shorty. I think it's under 180 pages, I believe. I gotta see for sure. Yeah, it's like 120 some pages. It's another shorty that you will get through, and I enjoyed picking it up every time that I picked it up. I kind of savored it, even though it was such a short one. And it's just a book that I felt really good about reading. And then I felt even better. Like once I was done, I was like, oh yeah, I'm so glad I had that experience. And isn't that what we're looking for in reading books, of like, oh yeah, that was, yes. Another author that I learned about thanks to Dan, The Perks of Being Married to a 6th grade reading teacher, is Elizabeth Acevedo. He literally pressed a copy of The Poet X into my hands and said, you're going to love this. And he was absolutely right. Elizabeth Acevedo is a Dominican American author, and a lot of what she writes is rooted in culture, the Afro-Latinx culture specifically, and it explores identity and who you are in relation to the family that it raises you, and who you are in relation to the rest of the world, and then who you really are to yourself, which I love that. This is technically YA, but man, like a lot of YA books, it really speaks to adults on the level of taking you through what it felt like to be 16 again, and then also seeing kind of how that has transformed the way that you see yourself now. Does that make sense to anybody but me? I sure hope so. The Poet X is also unique. So just like Kim Fay's novel is an epistolary, this is a unique writing style in that it is poetry. So it blends poetry and narrative to tell the story of Xiomara Batista, a Dominican American teenager growing up in Harlem who feels unheard and unseen in her strict religious household. With a body that draws attention she doesn't want and a mother who expects her to be devout, Xiomara turns to poetry as a refuge, filling her notebook with unspoken thoughts and emotions. When she's invited to join her school's slam poetry club, Xiomara faces a difficult choice: pursue her passion in secret or obey her mother's rigid expectations. As she navigates the constraints placed on her, Xiomara's circumstances are her own, but the struggles and desires she's experiencing as a teenager made me feel so connected to my own youth. I would love to know what Xiomara is like now as a grown-up. I think that, she's the type of character that you want to spend more time with. And if you are not a poetry reader, please do not be put off by or intimidated by the fact that this is narrative poetry. It is, you quickly get into the rhythm of reading this book, and you quickly get into the rhythm of the words and of Xiomara and of the world that she's living in. So it is not something, it takes a little bit of getting used to at first, I will admit that, but it is not something that is a hindrance to the reading experience good in any way. This is another one that I recommend to so many different people. It's award-winning for a reason. It's just a really great story, and you're going to love it. I know it. My final pick is by an author who holds so much of my heart. Maeve Binchy is another Irish writer who I began reading when I was in middle school, and her writing is absolutely foundational to me as a writer now. She is absolutely a big part of why I'm a writer. And my understanding of storytelling and the simple ways that everyday life can and do make everything. I mean, we're all just living our own simple lives. Most of us are not doing anything incredible on a day-to-day basis. We may do something pretty interesting once a month. And somehow Maeve Binchy she's passed away, she had a knack for really taking those everyday experiences and just extracting all of the meaning out of them. So the book that I've been holding close to my heart is Tara Road. And this is one of my favorite novels by Maeve Binchy. So it's a really fun trope that I enjoy, which is house swap. So it follows Rhea Lynch, who seems to have the perfect life in Dublin with a very handsome, seemingly successful husband and 2 children. And her husband's not great. He's not super successful. He's not anything that she thinks he is. And he cheats on her and he leaves her for a much younger woman that he gets pregnant. So again, another story of a woman having to deal with blows that challenge not only her personal identity, but also the reality of her living situation. So she doesn't have a job outside of the home. Her job was raising their children and keeping the home going. But that's not going to be enough for her to be able to create her own life moving forward without her husband. And so she decides to make some big moves. And so she decides to swap homes with Marilyn. And Marilyn lives in California, I believe. No, she lives in Connecticut. I knew it was a C. She lives in Connecticut, and she is going through her own situation. She is grieving a serious loss. She's got to get out of town. She needs something else. And so they swap homes, they swap lives, friends, and they each get to experience the other person's setting and home in a new way. And it's just absolutely delightful to see the two of them also forge a friendship as they get to know each other living in one another's spaces, but also as they communicate. And each of them finds a strength that they needed and that they were missing desperately. And the strength is rooted again in community, connection, friendship, those things that I absolutely adore. And I also really love it when a jerky husband gets his comeuppance. And don't you worry, that absolutely happens here. I really appreciate that about pretty much all of Binchy's stories that I've ever read, is that like the person who really deserves to have it coming eventually does, and often in unexpected ways that are just delightful. So I love everything that Maeve Binchy has read. No, that she has written. I don't know everything she ever read. But I adore her, and her books line my shelves. And if you are not familiar with Maeve Binchy, then I suggest you start with Tara Road. It's absolutely delightful. And I believe that there was also a made-for-TV movie made of this that stars Andie MacDowell, and I bet that's great. I have never seen it, which seems really weird, but it's so good. All right, there are all of my... No, those aren't even close to all of my favorite books written by females. Not even close. But that is a really great start. I hope that you have found something new to add to your to-be-read list, your old TBR. And I would love to know, let's fill up everybody's TBR. Pop down in the comments who you're reading right now, especially if it is a female writer, since it is Women's History Month. And, women have made quite a few contributions to the literary world, as well as the rest of the world. So let's explore that together. Let's build a really good TBR down in the comments and let me know also what are some of the key themes that you find yourself reading. Mine, obviously, community, connection, friendship, reinventing yourself, figuring out what you're going to do in the next chapter of your life. Those are obviously themes that really resonate with me. But how about you? What do you find yourself pulling over and over again off the shelf? I'd love to know. Okay, that's all I have for you today. That feels like enough, right? Yeah. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for spending some time with me. And until my next video, take care.